Hello guys, welcome to a new series, and it is the Queenside attack, and there is a close relation between the subject of Queenside pawn majority and the Queenside attack. Although in itself the exploitation of a Queenside majority does not properly speaking constitute an attack. The reason is that a Queenside attack aims at definite object, pieces or pawns, whereas in the case of a Queenside pawn majority, the purpose is to effect a pawn breakthrough, while frequently the real struggle rages on other fronts. The Queenside attack is local and in the nature of things far more violent, and here we will see a practical example. This game was played between Bogolibo and Capablanca in New York 1924, and it's a Colle system opening. And let's look at look the game. D4, knight f6, knight f3, d5, e3, e6, the bishop d3, c5, b3, knight c6, castle shot, bishop to d6, and bishop to b2, and castle shot, and knight bd2, queen e7, knight e5, c takes d4, e takes d4, bishop to a3, bishop takes a3, queen takes a3, knight df3, bishop after knight f3, bishop to d7, knight takes c6, bishop takes c6. Here the theory says that black stands better. We see equal pawns, equal pieces, and approximately equal mobility. True, the black queen is posted in white's territory, but if necessary she can be driven off or exchanged by queen c1. Why then is black's game preferable here? The answer is because he has attacking chances on the queen side. On white's queen side, the three pawns a2, b3 and c2 are solid and well protected. Where then are the chances of attack? Let it be said that black's attack cannot depend on single unrelated moves, but rather on a broad, accurately designed plan. White's c-pawn is weak, or to be more accurate, can become weak. At, uh, at present it is adequately guarded by the bishop, but this piece might be exchanged. In fact, the black bishop can force its exchange, after which the c-pawn will have to be protected by other, less reliable means. The pawn then will be attacked along the c-file by a rook or two rooks, and also the queen, and possibly still further by the black knight. It is then an open question whether white can at the right moment find adequate defensive measures. This does not appear to be so difficult when white has equal forces at his disposal. But the problem is not as simple as it appears. While white's pieces are tied to the defense of the c-pawn, black will, black will in all probability and without relaxing his grip threaten other parts of the board and present white with additional problems, which he may be unable to solve. Let us examine the real reason for white's difficulties and basis of black's attacking chances. The open c-file is not the main factor, but the fact that white has played b3. If this pawn were still on its original square at b2, white could play c3 and he would have little to fear. So was b3 a faulty move? No, for if we could come to such a drastic conclusion, we would hardly dare to make any move at all. The real mistake occurred when at a later stage white exchanged his dark squared bishop on the 11th move. For this exchange created holes in white's queenside position, b2 and c3, and these holes gave black the opportunity to exploit the open c-file. It is therefore usual to play a3 instead of knight bd2 on the 8th move, thus definitely preventing black's bishop a3. Note well that white could not defer a3 even for one move without risking further damage. If at all he would have played the a3 move on 9th move instead of 8th, then black would have obtained e5, and he would have obtained a majority in the center as well as the free game. Now black can initiate an attack along the attack on white along the c file. So now queen to d2. So here white plays queen to d2. Now let us examine some other ideas. If at all c4, in order to remove the backwardness of the weak pawn, without delay, white threatens c5, establishing a queenside pawn majority, and so black has no option but to exchange pawns by d takes c4, b takes c4. Now how do matters stand with regard to white's pawn formation? Has it improved or deteriorated? It is definitely worse, as after rook f to d8, white's d-pawn has clearly become weak. Now for example, after knight to e5, and here bishop to a4, rook takes d4 cannot be played because of bishop takes h7. Now queen d2, now queen to d6, now knight to f3, bishop to c6. It is clear that white will not get off the scot-free. So the conclusion of this c4 is, now or later white transfers the weakness on the c file to the d file. From the c file to the weakness is now transferred to the d file without strengthening his position. So this is the result of the move c4. So let us see, if at all without c4, if we place knight to e5, then rook a c8, then knight takes c6, rook takes c6. White has eliminated black's bishop, so that now the remaining white bishop can be expected to provide reliable protection for the c-pawn. However, this does not cover the whole question. There is not only a weak pawn at c2, but also a weak square at c3. Sooner or later a rook will settle down on that square and keep the whole of white's queenside under restraint. This again will afford the knight full freedom of action, and once the bishop is exchanged, black will conquer c2, which in turn will lead to further success. It would lead us too far to go into great detail here, but one thing stands out well, that is black has the initiative. After knight e5, if at all here queen to c1, this would seem to be the best continuation here, for if the attacker decides to accept the offer and exchanges queens, he is deprived of his best attacking piece, which is another way of saying his attack has become far less dangerous. In addition, the white king, once the queens are off the board, can play an important part in the defense of his queenside. At the same time, white with queen c1 abandons any idea of assuming the initiative and confesses that as first player he has failed to maintain his birthright. So here after queen to d2, now rook a c8, now c3, a6, blacks blacks black prepares for the following, now knight e5, now bishop to b5. An important intermediary part of black strategy. In order to increase the pressure on c2 and c3, black submits to his b pawn being doubled. This he does more readily, as his pawn at b5 will help the attack by stopping white playing c4. Now f3 by white. If at all c4, then sorry, c4, then dc4, bc4. Now again the weakness is transferred to the d file. Now after bishop c6, the d pawn is weak. So f3, if at all bishop takes b5, a takes b5, a takes rook f c1, knight to e4, and queen to e3. Here not queen d3, it is met by queen b2, or even knight takes c3 can be played, because after rook takes c3 there is a double attack here, so that is the point. So here queen e3 is correct. If now this move is played, rook takes c3, and the point is the c1 square is protected by the queen from e3. So after queen to e3, now rook to c7, rook to c7, and if at all c4, bc4, bc4, queen takes e3, f takes e3, and f6, winning a pawn. If instead of c4, if f3 is played, then knight to d6, rook to c2, rook fc8, rook ac1, and b4 here, and again winning a pawn because c4 fails to dc4, exploiting the unguarded white queen. Here after f3, wait, if instead of rook fc1, if f3 is played, then rook c7, now rook fc1, now rook fc8, now rook c2, knight to e8, now rook ac1, now knight to d6, and black has prevented the advance of the c pawn and exercise strong pressure on white's position. So after bishop b5, white did not exchange the bishop. He went for f3, and now bishop takes, knight takes, rook c7, rook ac1, and rook fc8, and rook c2, knight to e8, and rook fc1, knight to d6. The forces on both sides have occupied the appropriate squares. Black's rooks threaten the c pawn, and the black knight commands c4, while the white rooks guard the queen side, and white knight has the option of knight e5 or knight c5. Now knight to e5. This is an unfortunate move. He should have played knight c5 so as to be able to bring the knight to a4 should it become necessary to reinforce the defense of the weak c pawn. Black can then reply with e5. But in that case too, white plays knight a4, and black's advance has only weakened his position and given the white queen chances of attack. Here knight c5 was correct. After knight c5, if at all e5, then knight a4 is played. The correct method for continuation for black is uh, is to play b6 after knight c5. Now knight to a4. Now rook c6. Now after rook c6, now queen d3. After queen d3, rook to a8, protecting the a pawn and intending to play knight b7, controlling c5, with a further threat of b5 and rook ac8 when black resumes his attack. In the meantime, white will have played rook a1 to guard the a2 pawn, which is compulsory since the knight will be forced back to b2. All this leaves white no chances of achieving anything. But in the game, knight e5 is played, then queen a5 by black. The time has come to let the queen take a direct part in the attack. Now knight b5 is threatened by black. Now a4, with the twofold object of preventing knight b5 and of maneuvering the white knight via d3 to c5. Then b4 and a5 would seal white's weakness very much. Now queen b6, knight to d3. White gives up a pawn in order to try some counteraction, but all it does is to delay the execution. Now if at all b4, then a5 will be played, and after b takes a5, queen takes a5, and white cannot defend the a pawn without leaving the c pawn. So then here after queen b6, now knight d3, then queen takes b3, knight to c5, queen b6, rook b2, queen a7, queen e1, b6, knight to d3, rook to c4, a5, b takes a5, knight c5, knight b5, rook e2, knight takes d4, c takes d4, and rook 8 takes c5. If at all d takes c5, then queen takes c5 check is coming. He plays it with a check, and the rook on c1 is gone, and also the queen will be lost. So that is the small tactic at the end. So let us see what was the black's plan of execution. His first plan was to doubling rooks on the c file, The next was elimination of the principal defensive piece, the bishop at d3 by an exchange a6 and bishop b5, by putting a6 and bishop b5, and the third plan was preventing white from getting rid of his weakness by gaining control of c4. The fourth plan was suitable placement of his remaining forces, the queen, the knight, and the neighboring pawns, which must occupy the right squares until the time is ripe for the final combination. So let us see the opening once more. Here, instead of knight bd2, he could have played a3, but a3, this would have stopped bishop to a3. The analysis shows d takes c5, bishop takes c5, and now knight bd2. And if at all queen e7 is played, and c4 and now a3, and now a3 can be played, also c4 can be played. So these are the various other motives. So here a4, if at all, then this, c takes d4, c takes d4, now e takes d4. I think black's plan of queen e7 cannot be done, so instead he can go b6 here after knight bd2. Now bishop to b7, he can go on this way, and now rook e1, and now rook c8, and now d takes c5, b takes c5, and now c4 can be played in this way. So guys, I hope this game would have been illustrative, and I know this is a very long game, and thank you for patiently seeing through the variations. I will be meeting you in the next game. Thank you all.